Hello everyone. It has been a while since my last video dedicated specifically to Malice Mizer. Today I decided to go over the aesthetic styles and music genres which Malice Mizer represented from the very beginnings of the band in 1992 to the end of their activity in 2001. A lot of people ask me to make a video like this. Before we start, please keep in mind that I am not an expert when it comes to things like this. Everything I say is based on my personal observations and opinions. If you disagree with me on anything or you know about some topic more than I do, please correct me in the comments. And in the music section of the video, I will not go very deep into analyzing the specific details of individual songs. In the future, I might make a few videos where I would do a complete breakdown of individual albums. This video is meant to give you just a general idea of what Malice Mizer was all about, both sound-wise and image-wise, in their specific eras. Without further ado, thank you to Mumble Honey, Remilia, Big Body Igor, Canary Casey, The Insomniac Slayer, Dali, Lemon Piglet, Hattie Soup, and Damian Trevor Vincent for supporting me on Patreon, and let's get into the video. I think we should start with discussing the aesthetic styles or subgenres of visual kei that Malice Mizer belonged to throughout their career. By the way, I do have a video where I discuss all the subgenres of visual kei, so you can check that out if you're interested. Upon Malice Mizer's formation in the years 1992 and 1993, they looked like a typical Kurofuku kei band. Elegant black and white suits and stuff, think early Lunacy for example. This aesthetic was carried over from Mana and Koji's previous band, Matenro. There are only a few photos of Matenro publicly available on the internet, but even with what we have, you can clearly tell that Matenro and early Malice Mizer looked very similar. But unlike Matenro, Malice Mizer drew heavy artistic inspirations from works of the French singer Mylène Farmer. Titles of their releases, their artworks, even the band's logo were all inspired by Mylène. By 1994, when the album Memoir was released, Malice Mizer significantly altered their look. Their costumes now incorporated elements inspired by French royalty of the 18th century, yet they still had a gothic feel to them. The album cover of Memoir depicts an interior of some Rococo or late Baroque mansion. From this point on, Malice Mizer drew heavily from the idealized vision of French aristocracy of the revolutionary period, which was popularized in Japan in the 1970s by the manga series The Rose of Versailles or Versailles Nobara. The manga significantly contributed to Japan's interest in French culture, earning its author Ryoko Ikeda the National Order of the Legion of Honor, France's highest national order of merit. After the departure of Tetsu and the introduction of Gecht as the new vocalist in 1995, the band's aesthetic gradually became more elaborate. Their costumes were more colorful, each member now had specific colors designated to them. Gecht usually wore either black or white, Mana wore blue, Koji wore red, Yuki wore yellow and orange, and Kami wore pink and purple. The artwork of the Uruwashiki single, the band's first release with Gecht, is a photograph of a pavilion in Belvedere, a garden within the complex of the Palace of Versailles. In the years that followed, Malice Mizer kept pushing their aristocratic image further. It peaked in the years 1997 and 1998. That was in the Merveille album era, when the band was signed to a major label. They even went as far as to record their music video for Bel Air in France, specifically in the 17th century palace known as Château de Lancourt. VKG considers this period of Malice Mizer to be the starting point of Tanbi kei, a subgenre of visual kei that, like Malice Mizer, is heavily inspired by European royalty. But of course this all originally started in 1994 with the Memoir period of the Tetsu era. Tetsu era of Malice Mizer is also Tan-BK in retrospect. Although there were some visual kei bands that are considered Tan-BK which predated Malice Mizer, Malice Mizer is seen as the strongest originator of this style. This is because of the band's dedication to this aesthetic, their development of it, but also simply due to the fact that they were very popular at the time and influenced a lot of other visual kei bands. And although Malice Mizer is not a definite Tan-BK band music-wise, as the style is now commonly associated with symphonic power metal, they basically set a route for all future Tan-BK artists image-wise. It is possible that Malice Mizer even coined the term Tan-BK, as an early use of the word Tanbi as a descriptor for this visual is traced to Malice Mizer's 1998 book Tanbi Jiken Kakumei. In order to differentiate Malice Mizer from other bands that were popular at the time, but were not as elaborate in their visuals, TV program Breakout tried to introduce a new category for visual kei bands, super visual. Other than Malice Mizer, it also described Shazna, Plastic Tree and Diren Grey, but it does not seem like this term was widely accepted by visual kei fans and has fallen into obscurity, although according to VKG's list of non-subgenres of visual kei, it is used in the Japanese fandom. In May 1998, Malice Mizer decided to take a short break from Tan-BK. For the Illuminati single, the band took on a medical theme. In the late 1990s, there was a trend for popular visual kei bands to adopt such aesthetic. It would eventually become known as Iryo-kei. Because this was just a one-off thing, Malice Mizer obviously cannot be classified as an Iryo-kei band, but they definitely did help popularize this aesthetic in the visual kei movement at the time. And also, yeah, in that period Malice Mizer would alternate between medical suits and BDSM costumes that made their photoshoots look like Judas Priest. This was another trend among visual kei bands at the time. Kami's passing in 1999 marked another turning point for Malice Mizer. The band drastically changed their image, opting for a dark, funerally gothic aesthetic in order to represent their grief. They were still color coordinating, but in contrast to the colorful Gact era, the color palette was dominated by black. They also often incorporated the gothic blue haze, which is signature of Mana's fashion designs. By the way, I will not be getting into Mana's personal style and his influence on Gothic Lolita, as this could be a topic for another video, so let me know if you would like to see me maybe do a video on the history of Gothic Lolita or something in the future. The Klaha era was mostly characterized by this elaborate Gothic aesthetic. For the artwork for Barano Seido, the band went for an edited picture of the St. Vitus Cathedral in Prague. The music video for Mayona Kanikawa Shitayaku Soku was recorded in the theme park Marble Village Lockhart Castle, which is centered around a 19th century castle relocated from the United Kingdom to Japan. Of course, this is also where they recorded their Dracula adaptation. They used a lot of roses and crosses. I don't know if this symbolism could be classified as Rosicrucian, but I do like this word, and I wanted to use it in this video. Following the release of Barano Seido, Malice Mizer decided to experiment again. Gardenia brought on a complete opposite of the gothic aesthetic. This time Malice Mizer went for Shirokei. Although Malice Mizer did adopt Shirokei-like aesthetics in the past, particularly for Lesiel, I personally feel like Gardenia is their definite approach to it. But like Iryo-kei, this was just a temporary thing for them. For the Beast of Blood single, Malice Mizer returned to a gothic aesthetic, but this time settled for a more simple look, with elegant suits instead of elaborate costumes. Finally, for Garnet, the band wore simple red and black robes, reminiscent of Christian monks. It should be noted that the Klaha era gothic costumes are still considered Tan-BK. And also I forgot to put this in the script, but it's worth to mention the costumes that Koji, Yuki and Mana wore for that recent Deep Sanctuary reunion. They are basically like a continuation of the Barano Seido style, I think. This, I think, concludes a very basic overview of Malice Mizer's visual aesthetics. Malice Mizer dabbled in so many different music styles that it would be impossible to categorize them under one specific genre. In my videos I usually called them art rock, as I believe this term describes them best. But it is a very big oversimplification. Speaking very broadly, Malice Mizer's music can be broken down into three distinct general styles: rock, pop and electronic. Once again, I am speaking very broadly. Songs composed by Mana are mostly rock and pop, while songs composed by Koji are generally electronic with a few exceptions. Malice Mizer's biography on AllMusic states that, despite the band maintaining a commercial aim, their music, quote, incorporated elements from darkwave, metal, techno, classical music, synth-pop and early gothic rock. I still believe that a majority of Malice Mizer's music can be considered art rock, or progressive rock, or symphonic rock. These terms are sometimes used synonymously according to some sources, but I don't know, I feel like neither progressive nor symphonic hammer it home for some Malice Mizer songs as close as art rock does. But this is just my personal opinion. For this video I will be using the terms art rock, progressive rock and symphonic rock kinda interchangeably based on a vibe that a song gives me. All that being said, let's now go over Malice Mizer releases and try to classify them as specific genres of music. You might disagree with some of my takes, and that is completely fine. Feel free to correct me on anything I say. Even though I try my best, it is very hard to find a good label for a lot of Malice Mizer songs, as they were all basically mashups of a lot of different genres. I would be way more confident in my categorization if we were talking metal music, as that is a niche that I kinda specialize in, I think. Malice Mizer's early demo releases of the Tetsu era, like the song Sadness, could be generally classified as gothic rock. Rage Your Music categorizes Speed of Desperate as death rock, a genre that combines punk with gothic rock. Things get complicated with the release of Memoir. The opening track, The Memoir, is a simple digital piano composition. We then move to Kyoku to Sora, which is Malice Mizer's first significant display of their love for classical music. The song is theatrical and classically oriented, Tetsu's energy in it is very punkish, and I struggle to think of a good label for it. I think of it as an intermediate point between Malice Mizer's gothic rock and art rock. If we want to get into like a specific labels, I feel like baroque gothic rock is a nice way to describe this song. The track that follows, Ege Umi ni Sasagu, is heavily atmospheric and definitely gothic rock. Gogo no Sasayaki is a bossa nova song, a Brazilian derivative of jazz that Malice Mizer would revisit later in their career. Miwaku no Roma is a similar case to Kyoku to Sora, with it balancing between gothic and art rock, although this one I think leans heavily on the side of art rock. It is significantly brighter, and keyboard arrangements reminiscent of baroque music are a central part of it. Seraph takes this even further, with it being driven completely by classically styled synthesizers. I feel like Seraph might be considered Malice Mizer's first art rock song. The album's reissue, Memoir DX, ends with the bonus track Baroque. This is the most complicated song of the Tetsu era in my opinion. Also the first Malice Mizer song I've ever heard, by the way. It is fast, heavy, and yet still melancholic and sad like the rest of the album, and even includes a classical break. Once again, I struggle to find a good label for it. Instinctively, I wanted to call it hard rock, but I don't think that does it justice. It's like heavy neoclassical progressive gothic rock. Yes, I just made up a new genre of music, you're welcome. The two singles with Gagged that followed the Tetsu era, Uruwashi Kikame no Shotaijo and Masheri, are pretty straightforward. It's pop music. Baroque pop or synth pop specifically, I think. Actually, Ma Cherie samples Laura Branigan's song Gloria, so I guess we can say it has a slight Eurodisco element. Compared with Memoir, Voyage Sans Retour, the band's first full album with Gekt, is way simpler to define music-wise. It mostly oscillates between art pop and symphonic rock. Yami no Kanata E, the opening track, is just some ambient thing. I think Transylvania, Premiera More, Itsuwari no Musete, Claire Tsuki no Shirabe, and Madrigal fall into the art pop category. Tsuyoku no Kakera and Shinobuto are art rock or symphonic rock, if that's the name you prefer. The song that stands out the most is No Pains No Gains. It is completely different from the rest of the album. It is electronic and definitely industrial. Rate Your Music calls it industrial rock, but I don't think it matches the song that well. I think there's not enough rock in it. So, electro-industrial maybe, or maybe dark electro. While trying to identify what genre fits the song best, I found the song Apparition of Fear by some underground musician D.R. Connery, and it has a very similar vibe to No Pains No Gains, instrumental-wise. And the musician calls this style horror symphonic industrial music. So we're getting very possibly unnecessarily specific again, but I think a term like this fits this song best. And Zencho, the ending track, is just a piano composition. Merveille is the most diverse of Malice Mizer's albums, and I have a lot to say about this one. Once again, it starts with a non-music track, the Merveille, then it switches to Sunikis, a heavily orchestrated song which is Yuki's only credit as a composer for Malice Mizer. Although the song is driven by orchestral instruments, I think the inclusion of guitars in the last minute of the song pushes it into the art rock category. Sunikis is followed by Bel Air. This, in my opinion, is the peak of Malice Mizer's art rock and one of the best progressive rock songs of all time. There's a music box intro, followed by a heavy instrumental of progressive neoclassical guitars switching between clean and distorted channels, sudden tempo changes, a random music box break out of nowhere right in the middle of the song. The Gekt's vocals are beautifully layered, there's this dreamlike outro, and the way that the song just doesn't stop but keeps going as it fades out with the guitars getting even more complex and Gekt starting to hum a different tune. I think Bel Air is an absolute masterpiece of a song. An article on the Japanese pop culture website Real Sound described Bel Air as the dawn of Visual Kei aesthetic metal, or Visual Kei Tanbi metal if we reference this to the Tanbi Kei style of Visual Kei. And I agree, despite Bel Air not being a metal song, it was fundamental for the Japanese symphonic metal bands that came after. After Bel Air, we have a complete tonal shift with Illuminati. It is an electronic song, but what genre specifically? I don't know. Like No Pains No Gains, it includes very minimal guitar, so I think anything that has rock in the name doesn't fit the bill. I'm just gonna call it experimental electronic music. Next up, Bryce. I think this is a simply very cheerful pop rock. Well, it is cheerful as long as we ignore what the lyrics are about. Aegean is a new version of Ege Umi ni Sasagu from the Memoir album. Unlike the original Tetsu version, I don't think the Gekt rework is gothic rock. It is more ethereal, if you know what I mean. I would say that Gekt's Aegean makes me feel like I'm slowly floating to the sky, while Tetsu's Ege makes me feel like I'm slowly falling down into a pit of despair. I'm sorry, that's the only way I can think of to describe this feeling. That's not to say that Gekt's version is more cheerful. It is definitely not, they are both melancholic, but in different ways. All that being said, I would label Aegean as art rock, with a hint of chamber pop maybe, I don't know. Au revoir. Despite this song's multi-layered composition, with its use of violins and pianos, I think it can simply be described as nostalgic pop rock. GTV is a completely electronic song, with no physical instruments in it as far as I know. I agree with Rage Your Music's classification of S-Conscious as electro-industrial. Maybe it has a little bit of electronic body music in it, but just a little bit. Les Ciel is another complicated one. It still is symphonic rock, but very different. I would call it symphonic or art rock mixed with this little style of music which I found out about while researching for this video, ethereal wave. Geka no Yasukyoku is another electronic track, although this one features a significant amount of guitar but not distorted. I didn't write it down, but it also includes a real accordion. If we want to get highly specific again, maybe neoclassical electronic music is how I would describe this song. Finally, the last track on this album, Bois de Merveille, I think is simply a classical waltz, though not as upbeat as popular classical waltzes tend to be. Oh, by the way, I just realized that I completely forgot about the songs that were included in the Gagged era singles. So that was Color Me Blood Red, that's an electronic song, and also, well, there was the bossa nova version of Au Revoir. Well, it has bossa nova in the title, so of course. Chinois, the 3-track long EP which includes Camille's compositions, is entirely electronic. I feel like calling it orchestral electronic music, maybe. Yes, I am really making shit up at this point. The first label that popped into my mind when I was trying to classify this was fairy tale electronic music. I don't think it's a term that actually exists, but I find it very fitting. Moving into the Klaha era, Baranoseido is overall a neoclassical darkwave album. All of the songs heavily rely on synthesizers. Kyomu no Nakade no Yugi and Chinurare Takajitsu stand out as they are more industrial than anything else on the album, so electro-industrial for both of them maybe. Hakai no Hate and Shiroi Hadanikuru, I'm not saying the whole thing, are the only songs that feature a significant use of physical instruments. Rage Your Music calls Hakai no Hate symphonic metal, but I don't think that's a good label for it. Despite the song being very heavy, it does not have a typical metal song structure or a metal guitar riff, so I will personally settle on something like symphonic hard rock or neoclassical hard rock. I will explain my reasoning for this in detail once we get to the singles of the Klaha era, so please wait a minute before calling me out in the comments. Shiroi, on the other hand, I think is reminiscent of Merveille era symphonic rock, just more gothic. So I would go for gothic symphonic rock. Gardenia, I think, falls into symphonic rock. The second track on the Gardenia single, Hokkai Jokyoku, is an industrial / neoclassical darkwave song similar to the Baranoseido album. I have very often seen people saying that Beast of Blood is a heavy metal song or a symphonic metal song, so it might be very controversial for me to say that. I don't think it is fully metal. Don't get me wrong, it is definitely metal adjacent, but it's just not all the way past the border of heavy metal. The guitar riff is entirely made up of typical metal power chords, but this is just one element of what makes a metal riff. It lacks the typical metal structure. Compare it to Forbidden by Moi de Moi, which has a very simple metal riff, comprised of power chords and palm muting and alternative picking. If you think that Beast of Blood is a metal song, that's perfectly fine with me. It's just that I personally believe it is just barely not enough. Like, it's right there on the no man's land between rock and metal, maybe a few steps closer to metal. Because of this, I choose to classify Beast of Blood as hard rock, maybe neoclassical hard rock like I chose for Hakai no Hate. Baptism of Blood, second track on the Beast of Blood single, is electro-industrial. And now finally Garnet, the last single released by Malice Mizer. Like Gardenia, I feel like the symphonic rock label matches Garnet pretty well, it's just darker than Gardenia. However, The second track on the single, Genso Rakuen, is another one I have mixed feelings about. A very overlooked song, by the way, it's one of my personal favorites. Like Beast of Blood, I believe it is on the no man's land between rock and metal, but it is way closer to metal. But the question is it enough to call it a metal song? Maybe. If only some parts of the riff were palm muted, I would be absolutely confident in saying that it is a symphonic metal song. But honestly, I think tremolo picking makes up for the lack of palm muting. It makes me believe that Malice Mizer were definitely going for a metal song with this one. Also, the song is like a middle ground between Malice Mizer and Moi Dis Moi. So, in my conclusion, I chose to consider Genso Rakuen a symphonic metal song. So, we have finally come to the end of my, I admit, subjective analysis of the many different aesthetic styles and music genres that Malice Mizer dabbled in throughout the years. If you made it to the end, please let me know in the comments if I did a good job at this. If you disagree with any of my points or you know about music more than I do, then also please let me know about any mistakes I've made. Once again, thank you to my Patreons: Mumble Honey, Remilia, Big Body Igor, Canary Casey, The Insomniac Slayer, Dali, Lemon Piglet, Hattie Soup and Damian Trevor Vincent. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye.